That's great. Thanks a lot, Michaela. It's really a pleasure to be here speaking with NIST at the NIST conference today, talking to all the great people that following all the great people that came this morning. I am Ross Foard. I work at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And a little bit about me. I have been in the public sector and private sector for over 20 years, doing cybersecurity and primarily identity and access management. I'm a senior engineer at CISA, and I work in the Architecture and Engineering Center of Excellence, where I am on ICAM SME, cryptographic SME, and I support zero trust efforts there. I'm also the co-leader on the Federal Mobility Group's Derived FIV working group. I was just recently appointed as a co-chair on the Federal ICAM subcommittee, and also I'm a government lead for an ATARC Identity Management Working Group. So I keep really busy, and I love talking about zero trust and identity and access management. So let me tell you a little bit about CISA. CISA is not very old. We've been around 3.5, 4 years now. We used to be another agency within DHS called MPPD, but now we're an operational agency. And our job is to help secure the critical infrastructure of the United States. There are 5 divisions and 2 centers and offices that are organized in order to be able to effectively manage and help secure those critical infrastructure. And my group is within the cybersecurity division. So CISA works really closely with the White House, developing the executive order on zero trust, and with OMB in helping agencies understand, interpret, and then execute the memos that came out after the Executive Order 1428. And the Executive Order 1428 was improving the nation's cybersecurity, so it fits really squarely in the Cybersecurity Division's mission. And we know that every agency, based upon that executive order, are on a journey to create a zero trust architecture within their agency. Cloud services also are one of the means that is the most beneficial in gaining zero trust architectural capabilities, because the cloud service providers generally have been incorporating zero trust principles into their architecture. So CISA, in support of OMB, has helped to update the strategy. We give feedback to OMB, and we've produced a couple of really important documents and also help agencies interpret the memo 2209 through cyberstats that we have with each agency. We have these cyberstats where agencies can ask questions, and we help them understand and help them interpret the executive order and the OMB memos. So we've done a few things at CISA, published a few documents. We first developed and then we updated with version 2 the zero trust maturity model. We also have published a cloud security technical reference architecture, which I'll refer to later. And recently we produced what we call SCUBA, a SCUBA hybrid identity solutions architecture, which is a way for agencies to look at configuration capability, architectures and configurations for adopting cloud services, primarily business applications. And they have some guidelines in them they can use to make sure they're doing that adoption in a secure way. And of course, NIST 800-207 and the definition of zero trust, the NCCOE labs that are project that's implementing the zero trust architecture at NIST, we pay close attention to those things, and we align with that as much as we humanly possible. So a little bit about the program one of the programs I work on in capacity building. It's called Continuous Diagnostic and Mitigation. It's been around for a decade. The last 7 years is implementing systems and services for the federal government. And one of the reasons I wanted to show this diagram is it aligns really very closely with the zero trust principles that we're trying to initiate. Let's see, can I do that? Okay, that's not as good a one. All right, so I'm going to start at the top and go down. CDM has a dashboard that each agency has an implementation of the dashboard in their own environment, and then there's a federal dashboard that CISA can see across the federal executive branch agencies. The first capability that we implemented at agencies was asset management. Given you have to know what assets you're trying to protect in order to protect them, that's been a long journey, and we are helping agencies really manage all the assets they have in their environment, and that is changing with the implementation of cloud, because the assets tend, as we've been talking about today, they tend not to be physical, persistent assets. They're much more ephemeral assets now. The next capability, the one that I was directly related to the work I do, is identity and access management. And this comes in two forms from the CDM program. It's helping agencies get an enterprise view of their users in their environment, primarily their workforce, their employees and contractors, and then helping them also secure privileged users, because that's a really important vector to manage. Network security management is the next capability area that CDM's been working on. And all of this is built to try to protect data. And the reason data protection management is shown both at the core, and it's the terminal implementation model for CDM, is that you must have all of these other capabilities in order to properly protect your data. And agencies need to do a better job of understanding where their sensitive data is in order to do that properly. So I mentioned that CISA supports the Zero Trust Architecture, and in our Zero Trust maturity model, we have a view that's a little different than the way some people view the architecture. We have 5 pillars and then underlying capability areas. And the pillars directly align with what I just showed from the CDM program, with one exception. Applications and workloads are represented in CDM through FISMA system identification, but they're actually, and they'll increasingly have more importance in the future since they're becoming such ephemeral workloads, we'll be needing to identify them uniquely instead of looking at them as static FISMA system identifications. So we have the 5 pillars, and then the underlying capabilities are, visibility and analytics, which part of that comes from the CDM dashboard, and then automation and orchestration. This is something that we are where we're able to do that, we want to provide automation and orchestration. And the CDM program has been helping agencies implement endpoint detection and response tools, which will enable them to do some response capabilities on endpoints in their environment. And there'll be more capabilities with an increasing focus on automation and orchestration capabilities in the future. I should mention also that as the cybersecurity division modernizes, some of the capabilities that CISA and MPPD have been providing for years, such as TIC, they modernize as well. And TIC 3.0 is a capability that supports the visibility and analytics, and if you are interested in that, you can look at TIC 3.0. It has a lot of different use cases and scenarios to describe how we look at the network environment these days. And then also I want to say that there's a capability that CISA is providing for agencies around protecting DNS, and that is also another capability that comes from my group for all the federal agencies, and increasingly we'll be expanding that to other parties as well. So I want to talk a little bit about OMBs and the goals that they've established for Zero Trust Architecture. The first I want to talk about is phishing-resistant authenticators. So the federal government has long used PIV cards and CAC cards in DoD to provide phishing-resistant authenticators, but they don't work everywhere, and the industry is modernizing with new capabilities from the FIDO Alliance, these FIDO2 phishing-resistant authenticators. Not only can they be used to augment the PIV card capabilities, but they actually give more flexibility in use. For instance, let's say you need to have a PIV card for normal access, but as administrator access, you want to have a separate credential. You might use a FIDO token for that purpose. centralizing identity management and privilege access management. So that is core to what I've been doing on the CDM program. Each agency has been encouraged and helped to establish a master user record where they can essentially have all of their identities in one place. This is going to be critically important for implementing M2209. A central identity repository is one of the key tenets of that. And then privilege access management really is necessary to help us provide better security for our high-value assets. Managing privileged users needs to be done in a more thoughtful manner than managing general users, so that you limit the impact that a general user can do, and only a privileged user has access to things. And we talked about that in a lot of ways. The previous group talked about that quite a bit, about differentiating access to the management plane. One of the things that is interesting and shows the fact that all the pillars of Zero Trust need to work together is that OMD called out that they want to have agencies implement a device-level signal when they make an access control decision. And this is really an important capability in our Zero Trust journey, that these different signals, these different pillars provide information that we're going to make decisions based upon. And we're really very fortunate that the community of people that create EDR tools, the people that create enterprise mobility management tools, that they've been working with people that build identity and access management capabilities for the cloud, and they are generally providing those signals so that you can make a combination decision. The device, I know the device, it's a healthy device, I know the person using the device, therefore and he has a proper credential, therefore I can let him on through this, I can make an access control decision. Really great thing, and I really appreciate OMB for asking for that capability so we can actually begin to help people envision new control models. And then one of the tenets is enforcing policies closer to the asset. I think that was really a lot of what the previous presenters were talking about, and we wholeheartedly support that. It's a journey. Most agencies are in a perimeter-based security model in their legacy environment, so these are things they have to learn about how to do. So I'll talk a little bit about the MFA options. CISA has published a few documents where this graphic is utilized, and we define what we consider to be the weakest of the multi-factor authentication options, all the way up to what OMB is desiring all the employees and contractors use, and that's a phishing-resistant authenticator. And we know there are two phishing-resistant authenticator types. These FIDO tokens that I mentioned that the FIDO Alliance is creating, and then public key infrastructure, the PKI, the smart cards we've been using for many years. In the middle, there's a lot of different types of other MFA, and they are exactly that. They are more secure than username and passwords, but they're less secure than phishing-resistant authenticators. And a little bit back to the program I'm on, I just wanted to give you an idea of an implementation architecture. This is the solution architecture that when I'm delivering identity and access management to most agencies, this is what it looks like. I'm going to start at the bottom right, and these are the target devices. So it's a legacy, consider we're in a legacy environment that has devices on their network, they're fairly static. First thing we were asked to do is provide some privilege access management to help them better manage their privileged users. One of the things CDM does is it goes through a process of selecting not only an integrator, but products that the integrator is going to implement. And for the PAM products, it was CyberArk and CA, now Broadcom Technologies, were the two PAM products. The information from the PAM tools gets fed into a SailPoint Identity IQ. That's the product they chose for the identity governance tool. And you can see in the bottom there are capabilities that CDM wants to have agencies be able to analyze trust sources of information we read. That's basically the suitability that you've been vetted. You have a smart card that you don't actually have a PIV card if you don't already have a suitability. The cred sources, basically that's the PIV card itself. Behave sources. So we We know that everybody should be doing annual cybersecurity training, so we try to measure that to make sure that when you have an active account that they've done annual cybersecurity training. And then the priv sources is a set of entitlements that you'll have for your privileged users. And the privileged users that we're really focusing on are what we call infrastructure impacting privileged users. So that's things like administrators that can manage network devices, or Active Directory administrators that can change your responsibility within the groups in Active Directory. That information gets sent up to what we call layer B, which is a few different products that help aggregate information together. And then it goes to the agency dashboard. And I mentioned the agency dashboard is, it's actually gone through a couple iterations currently, and successfully it's on Elastic Stack. And the Elastic Stack implements a few different containers within the dashboard. And then finally, like I said, we have a federal dashboard, and that is also an Elastic that we can see across the agencies. So I mentioned a minute ago endpoint detection and response and device signals, and I just want to target that these EDR tools are really important for providing good visibility on what's happening on devices on your network, and they cover both HWAM and SWAM, which are the two of the main asset management capabilities that CDM measures. And typically they feed a SIEM tool, and many agencies are implementing orchestration and response with their EDR tools. Recently, I mentioned that CISA had released a product called the SCUBA product, and this is how we help agencies visualize and then implement controls on their business applications. What we've been focusing on up till now is Microsoft 365 applications, and there's not only what we talk about there in terms of access control is we want agencies to look at doing some context-based access control. So whether it's role-based access control or the ability to take advantage of attribute-based access control, we want agencies to look at their access control configuration, and we have guidance on helping them do that. There's a cloud identity playbook that was published by the ICAM subcommittee, and it has really important information in it. Describes the shared responsibility model that agencies have between their own implementations and the cloud service providers' capabilities. And then I do want to talk a little bit about the DevSecOps. In CISA's cloud technical reference architecture, we have a section that talks about DevSecOps. And this is a really important change in the way people deliver services, particularly when they're doing cloud services. You want to be able to have a continuous ability to interact with the applications, have a structured manner of doing more rapid development. And the reason that is really important is you want to be able to make security measurements at different points in the architecture. And then the reason that, when you have a security problem, you want to be able to introduce that security mitigation into the environment as rapidly as possible, and DevSecOps allows you to do that. So the ICAM architecture that it's been produced for a long time. It persists. Nothing had to really change in terms of how we describe the federal ICAM architecture. Implementation will be different than it was when we were doing this for a legacy environment, but the basic structure and the components and the interactions, they all remain the same. We just were doing it quite differently. I want to take a quick tour into the NIST Zero Trust pilots. This most recent implementation or publication of the documentation, I found this graphic to be really important in helping understand how policy information points, pieces of information that will help inform the policy decision points and then the policy enforcement points are really very, very important. Information can come from many different sources. We talked about devices just a moment ago, right? But the previous speakers talked about many sources of information that the service mesh will ingest to make decisions, help make decisions on. I think that's really a critical evolution and a great point. Also, I want to talk about kind of a vision that I have about this context-based access control. I look at identity and credentials as being two inputs that you have to have good understanding of. And then the context comes from a number of places. We mentioned device, location's a really good context. Network and application context has to go into. And then whether it's roles, entitlements expressed as attributes, certifications that may be provided externally, all of those go into an access decision. It may be serialized for now, but hopefully someday there'll be more aggregated access control decisions that take into account risk scores about all the different information you're taking, policies that are expressed in policy languages, and then not only just authentication, but authorization engines that can allow you to make authorization and control decisions. And then, of course, then they go to the different kinds of resources, of which there's very many. And, I call out a few here. Infrastructure is being built by code right now, so that's important. APIs are how you do most of these things. And then all of this needs to be instrumented in your analytics and orchestration capabilities that are outside of the identity infrastructure, but need to have strong input to and access from the identity infrastructure. And that takes me down to I have 4 minutes for questions. Anybody have questions? Michaela, how do we switch to the questions? Oh, there we go. Does M2209 specify and or recommend implementation deadlines? If not, how would agencies prioritize? So M2209, there are deadlines. I don't remember what they are. I know that the plans were already submitted, the initial plans. I will say this, that we just released version 2 of the Zero Trust Maturity Model. The update to that model included an initial phase before the advanced and optimal. We used to have traditional, advanced, and optimal, and now we have traditional, initial, advanced, and optimal. And there's a matrix which I didn't have time to discuss today about what kind of capabilities at each one of those maturities you should be able to reach. Every agency is at a different level of implementation, and you shouldn't take the Zero Trust Maturity Model as a prescriptive implementation plan, but you should move directed based upon your current maturity to each of those successive maturity elements that are expressed in that model. And look, every agency is different because every agency has different cultures, different risks, and so we're trying to express that there is a maturity that occurs, and it will occur over many years. There's nothing, it's like, okay, by next week you should have this done. Maybe DoD will be able to do this in years because they have a really controlled environment that they can leverage. But in the federal civilian, every agency has different funding profiles as well as security profiles. So the deadlines will be coming up from OMB, and each agency will know those deadlines as they do that. What's the biggest gap you're seeing when implementing Zero Trust in an agency? I think the biggest gap I'm seeing is there's a tendency to try to describe the end game, whereas what's really needed is just to begin. And the maturity model actually does a good job of telling you kind of if where you need to get to initially. So you should start planning to go through those. I believe identity and access management is a really excellent place for agencies to start. They already have policies around their identity and access management. They can improve those policies, particularly around privileged users. They can extend their legacy identity infrastructure that they have on-premise to a cloud service provider. All the cloud service providers, either natively or through third parties, can offer extended capabilities, and I think that's one of the areas that is ripe for just taking advantage of. I don't think it's the only area. Each of those pillars have some things to offer, and you should look across the pillars. But I in my focus, and I think very much the way the previous presenters were talking, I think the identity pillar is a really important place to focus to move forward, and although not exclusive. Does CISA coordinate with NIST with regard to Zero Trust? Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, in more ways than just zero trust, right? My entire concept of identity comes right from what NIST, when they evolve identity. Access control systems, right? David has presented both years ago, role-based access control, more recently attribute, and then next-gen access control, exactly what the previous people were speaking about. Look, that is the model that I think of, and I think it's a really great source for everybody, and certainly is a great source for CISA. Thank you very much.